Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods, no grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, determined to serve her country even after a diabetes diagnosis, Caroline Marshall found a way. She's now a special agent with the FBI.
It was a nurse from headquarters that called me to let me know that I had passed the medical. And I was trying to hold it together because here I am on this very professional call. It's a Washington, D.C. headquarters number that's calling me. And I just lost it on the phone with her. And I said, I am so sorry that I am sobbing into the phone, but I can't even tell you what this means to me. And she was great about it. She said, nope. She said, you have every reason to be emotional. She said, this doesn't happen very often. That emotional call was really just the start of her training. Caroline shares what it takes to be an FBI SWAT team member with type 1. And she just had a baby. Up-and-coming country singer Ben Rue joins me to talk about his journey with diabetes and his partnership with Roche.
Let 'em loose, let 'em run, let 'em chase down the sun, let 'em fly, let 'em crash, let 'em go, let 'em roll like that. With the wind where there ain't no fences, like 1,000 horses pounding on your heart, trying to break through. Let 'em loose.
Plus, in our Know Better segment, a look at sharing CGM data. Good advice for talking about it before you jump right in. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of Diabetes Connections. We aim to educate and inspire about type 1 diabetes by sharing stories of connections, talking to leaders and authors and celebrities in our community, as well as the healthcare companies, the tech folks pushing things forward, and, quote, everyday people just living with type 1 diabetes. My son was diagnosed 11 years ago, just before he turned 2. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. And I am so excited to have you here this week. I met our guest today back in the fall at one of the conferences I went to, and I knew I had to have her on the show. Speaking to an FBI agent about what goes on behind the scenes is amazing anyway. But then to find out that this is a woman who had military dreams. Her father is a Marine, and that's what she wanted to do, only to be diagnosed with type 1 and have those dreams taken away. How she persevered and made it to the FBI to be one of the few female members of a SWAT team. Great story. And with Mother's Day coming up, Mother's Day is this Sunday, May 13th. I thought it would be fun to talk to her as well because she just had a baby, so it's her first Mother's Day. We'll get to Caroline Marshall in just a couple of minutes. A big thank you to everybody at Touched by Type 1, just back from that conference in Orlando. This is put on by the folks who do Dancing for Diabetes. It was only the second year that they've had this conference, which I didn't realize because it's really well run. A thrill always to meet a lot of listeners, to talk to people about our experiences. So I really appreciate that. Thanks for having me down there. And we'll continue to keep you posted on cool events and fun stuff going on all over the country. And while I was there for Touched by Type 1, I ran into Kerri Sparling, and she writes the 6 Until Me blog. And you're probably very familiar with her. And if you're not, please go ahead and read her blog. I'll see you next year when you're done reading it. She's written it for years and years, and it's fantastic. I'll link it up in the show notes. And I bring up Kerri because I do a presentation about moms and daughters, about talking to your teen daughter about diabetes and why, it's called She Just Doesn't Get It. And it's all about why we can't understand each other when really we're all saying the same things. And of course, I don't have a daughter with type 1, but I do have a 16-year-old daughter. And one of the things that came up was the way in which Benny and I have worked out how we share CGM data. And I'm always surprised to find parents who have never actually talked about this with their kids. Maybe it's because you started when they were 3, and of course you're not going to ask them, hey, how would you like to share your CGM data with mommy? But, when they're 10 or 20 or, even 8, I think it's an appropriate conversation to have. So Benny and I have a system where we will only talk about it if he's low for a certain amount of time, if he's high for a certain amount of time. I'll text him, and I won't if we don't cross those thresholds. And we revisit it every once in a while because he's gotten older and things have changed. And, sometimes he doesn't answer me and sometimes his phone dies. And, those are other kinds of conversations. But Kerri had done a project a couple of years ago about sharing CGM data to help people have those conversations. So she agreed to let me link that up and talk about it a little bit later in the show. And that's our Know Better segment today. So I very much appreciate that. Kerri, we will talk more about that coming up. But first, when you have a toddler diagnosed with type 1, you hear rumblings for a long time about the teen years. When it hit us at full force a little early, I was so glad we had the Dexcom. Benny's insulin needs started going way up around age 11, and he's grown, I don't know how many inches. He is now 5'8". So that's probably about 8 inches in the last 3 years. Along with the hormone swings, I cannot imagine managing diabetes during this crazy time without the Dexcom. We can react more quickly to highs and lows, see the trends, and adjust insulin doses with advice from our endocrinologist. I know the G5 Mobile is helping to improve Benny's A1C and overall health. We just got the G6. And if you haven't listened, in the last episode, I spoke a little bit about that, and we did a Facebook Live on it as well, so go check that out. Lots of interesting stuff going on with the G6. And for more information about all of this, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. My guest today had a dream of joining the military. She was going to go to West Point. Her dad's a U.S. Marine. But at age 7, Caroline Marshall developed type 1 diabetes, and you cannot serve in active duty in the military right now in this country with type 1 diabetes. So Caroline had to really readjust. She found a way to make her dreams come true. But really what she did was she changed her dream a bit, and she talks about that. She's very realistic. I heard her speak at a conference in Tampa a couple of months ago, and it really struck me how this is a person with purpose, and you'll hear about that. Very disciplined, very strong, very smart. Caroline set her sights on the FBI, but first she became a police officer. She interned with the Navy Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, and then she went on to apply to the FBI, which took quite a bit of work, not just with diabetes, and she will tell you the story. Her husband's with the National Guard. They just had a baby this year. With Mother's Day coming up, I thought this was a perfect time to talk with her. It's a great story. Here's my interview with Caroline Marshall. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me. I have wanted to talk to you ever since I saw your name on the program last fall. So thanks for joining me, and congratulations on your new baby.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and we are very excited about the baby. And, of course, I think that she's perfect and beautiful, but I realize I'm a little bit biased.
What's her name? She was born on March 21st?
Yeah, her name is Tessa.
Oh. Well, as you're about to celebrate your first Mother's Day, we say congratulations to you and enjoy that. That is fantastic.
Thank you.
So I want to talk about...
Thank you.
Oh, of course. It's wonderful. Let's start really at the beginning of your story, because you were diagnosed as a kid. And at the time, did you already think that you wanted to go into some kind of law enforcement?
I don't know if I thought about it that early on. I was 7 years old when I was diagnosed. And at that point, all I was thinking about was, when was my next baseball game? When was my next tennis match? When was I going to climb the next mountain? Those were really the things that were at the forefront of my brain. And so then as time progressed, and as I got older, that was when I started thinking about a career in law enforcement. Mostly that was because of my dad's influence. My dad was a Marine, or is a Marine, I should say. No such thing as a former Marine. And so he really inspired me to look into that kind of life. And when I realized that the military wasn't necessarily going to be an option for me with the diabetes, then that's when law enforcement became very appealing to me, because I knew that there was probably a way that I could start serving the country in that realm. And even if it wasn't directly through the military, I felt like, well, maybe I can do this and it's going to be a great option for me.
When you're 7 years old, as you said, really weren't thinking that far ahead. But you knew you had this incredible legacy from your dad, and it sounds like your parents kept you pretty active and busy. Can you take us back to that age? Do you remember what it was like when you were diagnosed? I don't know if 7 is too young to remember that, and what you thought about all those sports and activities you were already doing. How did that change?
Yeah, nothing really. I give my parents all the credit for this. I was very active, and it wasn't because they were pushing me to be active. I think I was just kind of a hyperactive little kid. And so I was constantly wanting to do things, and I was constantly wanting to be physical and be playing sports and doing activities. I'm sure I drove my parents nuts, but all of that stuff was already kind of in place when I was diagnosed. And to their credit, they did not want to see any changes in that. And so my activity level was exactly the same, if not more, maybe, after the diagnosis. And I give them a lot of credit for that, because they easily could have decided, and we're pretty nervous about her being so involved in all these things, and what's going to happen to her blood sugar when she's, out playing tennis or baseball or whatever. There was none of that from them. So I didn't feel like there were any changes in a negative way in my life after the diagnosis. That's
great. That is so great. And I imagine 25, 28 years ago, I'm guessing here on your age, to be diagnosed it was a different time too.
Thank you. You just made me a lot younger.
Yeah.
Than 30 years.
Okay. Okay. So 30 years ago.
Thank you for being so kind.
It's what we try. It's early in the interview. But 30 years ago, the technology wasn't quite what it is today, so even letting them play, letting you play sports and doing everything else, you really had to be pretty diligent, I would imagine, about what you ate and when.
Yeah. And it was, I think all of this stuff was really tough on my parents, not so much for me, because it was my mom that was having to use that old school food pyramid and measuring out every single thing that I ate and packing every meal that I ate away from the house. So all I saw were lunches and meals that were being prepared for me, and that I was supposed to eat them, which was no big deal. But she really had to educate herself on how to take care of a 7-year-old with diabetes, because it was a lot more complicated back then, and there wasn't the same kind of technology. It was all manual injections, all finger sticks, which is, a lot of people are still doing those, but at least now there are some really great technology options for parents of kids with diabetes that we just didn't have back then.
It is really nice, though, as a parent, to hear you say something like, well, it was easy for me. I ate the food my parents gave me, and that sort of thing. That makes me feel kind of good. I hope my son feels the same way. So when you just...
I think it was I'm sure that behind closed doors for my parents, sure that there was a lot of stress and a lot of sadness, but I never saw any of that. So that's to their credit as well.
Kudos to them for sure. When you started thinking about joining the military in some capacity, did you and your dad talk about that? Did you articulate that to him? Do you remember talking about it at all?
I do remember talking about it to him, and it had been quite a while since he had actually been in the military. So he wasn't sure what the protocol was at that point when I was interested. And together we thought, well, maybe that some things have changed, and maybe there are some options for me to pursue on the military end of things. And then we kind of learned together that just wasn't the case at that time. So, yeah, I definitely spoke with him about that, and then also kind of went back to that same idea after I got denied military employment through the law enforcement, and talking with him about that, and just getting his input. And, of course, he was very supportive, because he knew what it meant to me to figure out some way to serve the country in a similar way that he had.
So what did you do? How did you handle, okay, cannot be in the military, I'm going to go be a police officer? I mean, do you just pivot to that? What brought you there? We'll hear Caroline's answer to that in just a moment. But first, One Touch is one of our sponsors. And last year, the One Touch team launched the Small Victories campaign, which aimed to recognize the small but significant accomplishments of those with diabetes. One Touch celebrated individuals for their efforts and encouraged the community to join the movement. Do you or someone you know use the One Touch Vario Flex meter? Nominate yourself or a loved one today for the Small Victories campaign by emailing onetouch@hellommc.com. That's onetouch@hellommc.com. I will link that up in the show notes so you can check it out at your convenience. Love it. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. Now back to Caroline talking about how she made the changes that ultimately got her to the FBI.
No, it's funny. So I think it was kind of a natural progression, starting with seeing Silence of the Lambs when I was about 11 years old. And I thought, man, that's a really cool job. I would really love to be in the FBI. So with that kind of in mind, and also, with this thought in mind that, hey, what can I do to serve? I thought that if there was any way that I could get employed by the FBI, how cool would that be? And at the time, I really wasn't sure whether or not that was an option. I really kind of had my sights on the FBI from the very beginning without really knowing whether or not that was feasible. So I thought, well, I know that I know myself of some police officers that have diabetes, so maybe that's a good place to start and kind of see what I think about being in law enforcement and see what that career is like, and then kind of build off of that, get some experience, understand the culture, understand what it is. So that's why I started with my first job out of college was as a police officer. So that's kind of how I entered into it, and the hope for me was that it was going to lead to some other opportunities down the road. Got it.
Well, before we go to those opportunities, because obviously you did take advantage of them, what's it like to be a cop with type 1?
I guess that's an interesting question because I never really thought of it that way. I always just thought of myself as a police officer, and I never really put police officer and type 1 together because
that's great.
For me, the type 1 is out. Yeah.
I love hearing that. I guess I was wondering if it, this sounds so dumb, if it gets in the way, if your, equipment or anything like that, if it hindered you in any way. Obviously it did not.
No, I didn't feel that way. I really didn't. I guess I considered myself, like I've always, it is part of my identity. So I always know that I'm a diabetic, but it's not really how I've tried not to have it be a defining factor in my personality. So I've got the diabetes. Yeah, I get it. I have to acknowledge it because I have to deal with it. But I don't want anyone else to think, oh, that's that type 1 diabetic police officer. So I never really put the two hand in hand like that. So for me, it was just about being a police officer and being a good police officer. And part of that is being a police officer that people, that your coworkers can rely on. And that means having the diabetes in good enough control that the diabetes never becomes an issue and that no one's worried about the role that diabetes is playing in your job.
That's great. And I just want to clarify, I mean absolutely, I know you know this, but I mean absolutely no disrespect when I say things like that. As we're doing this episode, I'm imagining, I know, but I'm imagining you more as a role model now as we're looking back. And I could see your point exactly, and I think most of my listeners who live with type 1 are hitting themselves in the head saying, Stacey, it's not like that. But I just want to clarify that.
I doubt it. No, it's fine.
Well, totally I think it's important because I ask it as a parent, right? I'm sure I hope my child doesn't see himself as I'm a football player with type 1. I'm a theater person with type 1. He's a kid. And he's all those things as well. So as we continue and I say more dumb things like that, I really appreciate you understanding where it's coming from. But did you have...
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think that was dumb at all.
Thank you. I know that we'll talk about this later. You do have some incredible routines. You are very careful. Did you have a low at any time as you were a police officer that you could not treat well, or did you just carry stuff with you and handled it well?
Yeah, I mean, I am sure that I had episodes where my blood sugar was dropping, but I am so meticulous about carrying things with me that it never became an issue. I can't point my finger to one time and say, oh, yeah, I remember that time when I was going out on that call and my blood sugar was really low and it was a big problem. I never had an experience like that, at least not one that I can remember. And I'm sure I would have heard about it from other coworkers if something like that had happened.
Then you interned for NCIS, which we all know, of course, as the TV show.
Yep, Mark Harmon show, yeah.
Terrible. But this is, I mean, what a great job. It seems, it just seems so interesting and exciting. Is it that interesting and as exciting as it seems?
No, I shouldn't say that.
Well,
but,
it's not a TV show.
It was great for me to have, the main thing that I gleaned out of that was having a federal law enforcement internship. And so that was very interesting to me to be to in some small way be part of the federal system and to see how it worked. I would say that NCIS is very, I don't want to say limited in what they investigate, but really there aren't a lot of NCIS agents out there that are investigating violent crime. So when you think about the breadth and depth of the FBI and what FBI agents are able to investigate, there's such a vast number of investigations that we become a part of and that are very interesting. So for what it's worth, I think that being part of a larger law enforcement agency that has scope and has jurisdiction over so many different issues, that to me is very fascinating. And I think it's a benefit of being an FBI agent over being an NCIS agent. But again, I realize my opinion is going to be a little biased.
When you applied full time for that job, though, you didn't get it.
Correct. Right.
So what happened there?
Right. So I had this great internship, and I thought the reason that I had interned for NCIS was because I had heard that their medical testing was not as stringent as FBI medical testing. Pre-employment medical screening, I guess is what I should call it. So I thought that maybe that was my, going to be my in to federal law enforcement. And the internship went great. And I was under the impression that if I wanted the spot as an NCIS agent, I would have it. And then I was very surprised when the next phone call that I received was that they couldn't offer me employment as a result of having type 1 diabetes. And so I was very surprised by that. I thought I had been barking up the right tree by finding an internship with an agency that I thought was not going to be as hard on people that had type 1 diabetes. Wow. So I kind of learned the hard way on that. And then at that point, I thought, you know what? The FBI was something that I wanted from the very beginning. I'm just going to go ahead and apply and see what happens. And I'm glad that I did because it ended up working out. Yeah.
So how did you get the job at the FBI if NCIS said no thank you?
Well, FBI never actually said no thank you.
Oh.
I just wasn't aware of what the specific policies were for the FBI. And sometimes you don't know these things until you actually apply. Like you can talk to a bunch of different people about what you think happens internally in any of these organizations. But you may not ever really know until your application's in there. And so the FBI does a really nice job of considering hires on a case-by-case basis. And I worked really hard to show that my diabetes was in very good control and that I was very diligent about it and very focused. And the FBI and the doctors and nurses at the FBI agreed with me and decided to give me a shot. So I will always be indebted to the FBI for taking that chance.
I think that along the way with some of the things that you've dealt with, being turned down or, not really knowing what happened there and finding out when you were younger that you couldn't be in the military, I think a lot of people probably would have said, okay, I get it, and gone on to something else. Was there a point where you said to yourself, it may not be worth it? Or over those years, did you just really just keep moving forward? It sounds like you did.
Yeah, I think maybe a little bit of both, because I was also, through the course of my college career and my graduate degree, I guess somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking, hey, I need to make sure that I'm setting myself up for success regardless of what happens in my career field, because I may not get exactly what I want in terms of being an FBI agent. So I definitely was I hadn't given up on the idea, but I think I was very well aware that it may not happen. And so I just didn't want to be left without some good options. So I really focused on the educational background end of things. And so that ended up working out well for me too, because some of the things that I studied were of interest to the FBI. So it all came together for me really, really nicely. And again, I feel very lucky for that.
What was your reaction when you found out that you'd been accepted into the FBI?
Oh my God, I sobbed. So I had a phone call from FBI headquarters from their medical unit. So this day actually was more emotional for me than any of the other days in the hiring process. But the day that I found out that I had passed the medical background, it was a nurse from headquarters that called me to let me know that I had passed the medical. And I was trying to hold it together because here I am on this very professional call. It's a Washington, D.C. headquarters number that's calling me. And I just lost it on the phone with her. And I said, I am so sorry that I am sobbing into the phone, but I can't even tell you what this means to me. And she was great about it. She said, nope. She said, you have every reason to be emotional. She said, this doesn't happen very often. So that happened. But then there was a whole bunch of other things that I still needed to accomplish in order to be hired, to include a polygraph, a background check, a physical fitness test. Extensive. There's so much that goes into every single person who's hired. And so then when I found out that I actually had passed all of that stuff, I found out on a Friday afternoon that I needed to report to the basic training at the FBI Academy on that very Sunday. And another phone call that I'll just never forget, and that really shaped a good portion of my life, or at least for my career, just based on that phone call. Hey, you got to be at Quantico on Sunday to report to new agents training. And it's just this feeling of, it's just kind of surreal. You're just walking on a cloud, and I'll never forget that. And it was one of the proudest times of my life that I can remember, that I hung up the phone and I called my dad and I said, you're not going to believe this, that I'm going to the FBI Academy on Sunday. And he said, what for? And I said, I'm starting. And so we both cried. It was amazing.
That is fantastic. And it is amazing to listen to, because you go through all this process and then you start basic training, which, many of us would think, well, that's the process, that's the start. But really, that's the end of the beginning. So then I'm shortchanging the story a little bit here for time purposes, but then how do you go from coming into the FBI at that level to becoming the only female SWAT member?
Yes. Yep. I'm sorry. There's probably I think there's a handful of female SWAT operators in the Bureau. I think there's maybe 4 or 5 of us, but I am the only female for my division's SWAT team. So my division right now is Albany Division. So we have a SWAT team based out of Albany. So I'm the lone female on the team for that.
Is that difficult? I mean, I'd like to think that you're treated just like another agent, but have you had any experiences that you just want to roll your eyes about or have to prove how tough you are?
You know what? Not on the team of guys that I'm with. I have a great team of people that are very supportive of having me on the team, that treat me like one of the guys in a good way. But I know, it would be silly for me to tell you that there aren't plenty of people out there that don't think that women should be on SWAT teams. And people are entitled to their opinion, and all I can do is do the very best job that I can and be professional and work hard and stay in good shape and know how to shoot. And hopefully the rest just kind of falls into place.
When you started, so I'm flipping back and forth here in time, though, but when you went to Quantico and you started that basic training, how long did it take you to get over that feeling of looking around and saying, I can't believe I'm here?
Oh, I never lost that. I felt that every day that I woke up there. It sounds silly, but that's not to say that the entire time I was there, it was so fun and I was elated, and it was such a great time. No, it was hard work and it was stressful, and there were times when I, along with the rest of my classmates, couldn't wait to get out of there. But I would say that every morning when I woke up, I would think to myself, holy cow, I am at the FBI Academy and I am going to be an FBI agent. And I never lost that feeling the whole time that I was there.
That's how you know that you love what you do. That's how I felt when I got my first broadcasting job. Like, they let me in. Who are these people?
Yeah, right, exactly.
What's your fitness regimen? I mean, you talked earlier, you were outside a lot, you played a lot of sports as a kid. I would imagine that between your job and your type 1, you are pretty regimented about how you stay in shape. Do you mind sharing some of that?
Yeah, I would say that my friends and family would tell you that I'm obsessive about working out and about staying in shape, and they're right. I can't deny it. It served me very well, and not the least of which in the way that it served me as far as being a healthy type 1 diabetic. So on average, and one of the reasons why having this baby last month was challenging was because my workouts were getting more and more laborious as I started to grow. But I had a C-section, and so I am restricted from certain types of activity for another 2 weeks. It's been 4 weeks so far. And that, above anything else, has been driving me crazy. So, because I do spend, a good amount of time in the gym and staying in shape. But on average, I would say I'm in the gym every day between an hour and a half to 2 hours. I would say that 3/4 to a half of that time is spent on cardio. I do a lot of running, and I do distance running, but I also do shorter distance running, just for sprints and things like that. I'm on the bike a lot. And whenever I can do these things outdoors, whenever the weather around here will permit, I will do that. And then a big portion of my physical fitness training is strength training. And that's really important, especially being on the SWAT team, being able to pull your own weight up, pull other people's weight up. Before I tried out for the SWAT team, I would always struggle with pull-ups. But then in order to successfully try out for the SWAT team, you need to be able to do pull-ups while you have all of your body armor on. So not only are you pulling your own weight up, but then you're pulling up all the weight of your body armor. So I really had to train hard to do that, because that upper body strength isn't something that a lot of women have naturally. So I really had to put some effort into making that happen. So in order to maintain that kind of physical strength, I'm definitely spending a good amount of time in the gym. And my husband is great about it, because he's very interested in fitness too, and he's helped us put together a gym even in our own basement, so that if time doesn't permit for us to get out of the house and get to the gym, that we've got plenty of stuff in the basement that we can use too. So we kind of have fun doing that.
Yeah, I envision with the baby now, I envision more home gym time.
Oh yeah, yep, definitely. And it works out great. I've got the baby monitor set up so that I can watch it while I'm down at the gym. So it works.
That's great. Are you going to go back to work? I know it's pretty recent after the birth of it. Her name's Tessa?
Tessa, yeah. So I will be going back to work the first week in June. So yes, and it will be hard to leave the baby, but I do love my job, and so I'm hoping that I'll be able to strike a good balance between the two.
That's great. So just a couple of questions, if you don't mind, about your pregnancy, because this is something that, when my son was diagnosed and he wasn't even 2, I had several people say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky he's not a girl, because now he would never have children. People with diabetes can't get pregnant." And I remember thinking,
right.
I'm not going to process this information, because I don't even know what I'm doing the next hour with him. But I realized that a lot of people feel, it was crazy times. But, people feel this way, and it can be very frightening. But I've met so many moms with type 1 who are so glad that they did. It's hard work, to keep A1Cs in range and all this other stuff. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like for you?
Yeah, of course, there is a lot of fear that people seem to associate with being a type 1 diabetic mother. And I really had, because my diabetes is so well controlled, and because I feel like I have had such few problems with it, I was not really thinking about what some of the difficulties might be. And it was really other people that brought it up to me and started to make me worry about it. And that was some of the first times when I thought, man, maybe this is a really dangerous thing to do. And people are trying to be helpful, but it is kind of scary when you hear about what some of the things are that can happen as a result of pregnancy complications resulting from the diabetes. So I would say that for my pregnancy, what really helped me And whether diabetes or not, I think staying active during that whole pregnancy was what really helped with my blood sugars too. But also just, as far as gaining weight, I didn't gain that much weight just because I think I was continuing to stay active. And so as the pregnancy for me, I will admit that I hated being pregnant. I'm so happy to have this little baby, but I was not a very good pregnant person because I didn't like how it was restricting certain things in my life, and also just being tired. I have very low tolerance for feeling tired. It drives me crazy when I can feel myself tired. So there were some things about being pregnant that weren't so much fun, but it had nothing to do with the diabetes. And I think that as far as whether or not I were diabetic, my pregnancy was very low maintenance and not very complicated, thank God. So I think my experience with pregnancy was probably one of the better ones you could hope for. And I don't say any of this to make it sound like I'm sugarcoating it, because like I said, it wasn't necessarily the 9 months that I really loved. But as far as health goes, I was very lucky. That's
great. If you don't mind me asking, what diabetes tools do you use? Or do you use an insulin pump? Do you use a CGM, that sort of thing?
Yep. So I have an insulin pump. I actually have the pump that is called the artificial pancreas. So, but I do not have that hooked up right now to a CGM because it was not approved yet for pregnancy. So I had started using this artificial pancreas. Then I found out I was pregnant, and so I had to come off of it. So for now, I'm just using the insulin pump, and I test my blood sugars just manually several times a day. But the pump has been great. It just affords me, with the type of lifestyle that I have, it affords me a certain amount of flexibility to not have to take time out and draw up a syringe and give myself a shot. So I do appreciate having that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's the Medtronic 670?
Yes.
Yeah. It's really amazing how the technology keeps moving along. So when you go back to work, are you going back as still on SWAT?
So right now I am on what we call it a TDY, or a temporary duty assignment. I did 2 months of it before I went out on maternity leave, and then I will go back for the remainder of, it'll be around a year, where I'm currently acting as a supervisor at our headquarters down in D.C. So once I go back to work, I'll be heading back down to D.C., and I'll stay there for about a year with my husband, and then we will come back. And then once I come back to my home office in Vermont, then I'll be back on the SWAT team.
That's great. When I first saw you speak, it was in Tampa, Florida, as I've said, at a JDRF conference. And the crowd was just riveted, because of your stories of, how you got into the FBI and all this. I'm curious, after that, a lot of people had questions. Were you surprised at some of the questions and the reaction that you get from parents and kids when you speak about this?
Sometimes, but what I try to keep in mind is these poor parents. I really do feel sorry for the parents that are dealing with this. Of course, it sucks for any kid that has to do this, but I think it's a much taller order to be the parents. Now that I myself am a parent, and now that I'm an adult. So I just try to keep in mind, regardless of what the questions are, that these parents are really kind of in crisis mode, some of them. And so for that reason, I try not to let any of the questions or line of questioning surprise me.
Do you find that you speak to a lot of kids who are curious about military service? Because that's one thing that, we tell these kids you can do anything, and then you find out you can't be an astronaut and you can't serve in the military. Right. How do you talk to kids about that?
What I try to acknowledge is the frustration, because I understand that that's a frustration, and there's nothing that I can say or do that's going to change that at this point. Who knows? Maybe someday down the road, maybe there will be type 1 diabetics that are in combat. I don't know if I necessarily see that happening anytime soon, but who knows? So I just try to acknowledge that, and also give them some sort of positive spin on it in terms of the way that I kind of went about it, because I remember being very disappointed and then thinking to myself, all right, now I'm going to do this. I'm going to show people, whoever that might be, that I am going to do something that is really cool and that's really worthwhile, that isn't necessarily exactly what I had in mind, but it's still pretty damn cool. And so I try to whenever I talk to kids about this sort of thing, I try to make sure that they understand that I'm not downplaying the disappointment and the frustration, because it's very real and I get it. But there are things that you can do with that there are fires that you can spark underneath yourself as a result of that frustration. And I think that that's kind of what I did.
That's terrific. It really is. Because I've come into contact with a couple of families, and I don't have that, the kids want to go into the military, and I try to point them and, read up on your story and find other ways to support, because I don't have that experience. That's not something that, and you sharing that, I think helps so many people, and hopefully will continue to help a lot more. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really all I have. Is there anything, before I wrap it up, or one or two more questions, is there anything you wanted to make sure to mention?
No, I think I got my main point across in just wanting, parents to hear that I really feel for them. And I think that gets glossed over a lot, because it's all about juvenile diabetes, and it's all about the kids, and which, as it should be. But I think that there is this very real piece that I don't want to be swept under the carpet about what this means for the parents of the kids that are being diagnosed with this. And that's why I say I really, and I think I mentioned it in Tampa, but I am so open to the idea of parents getting in touch with me and asking questions of me. And then if they want to talk to my parents about how my parents handled it, my parents are very open to that idea too. So the more people want to communicate with me, as far as I'm concerned, the better. And I think that's maybe the best service that I can provide.
That's fantastic. How are your parents? Now they're grandparents.
They're great. They're reveling in this whole new phase of of parenthood and grandparenthood. They're doing great.
That's fantastic. Do you have any more goals? I mean, to me, it's like you have just achieved this, this remarkable feat, and you're going to go right back to it. Is there anything else that you would like to accomplish in law enforcement, or otherwise?
Yeah. I mean, I think now the more important goal is to be a good parent, which I think is a very tall order.
Oh, it's so easy. It's so easy.
Yeah. So there's that. But then, from the work perspective, I think that my husband and I have talked about this. Something that we would both be really interested in doing is getting some sort of overseas assignment, and those are very hard assignments to get. They're very competitive. But if an opportunity came up where we could do something like that, I think we would feel like we had really accomplished something great.
That's fantastic. I hope you get to do that at some point.
Yeah, me too.
Caroline, thank you so much for joining me, for sharing your story, and I hope you come back and talk to us again soon. Happy Mother's Day.
And thank you. Same to you. And thanks for having me, and I hope that this was somewhat helpful.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
She is serious about wanting to talk to parents and kids. She asked me if I could share her email. I'm a little bit more protective of her, but if you'd like to have her contact you, please email me or contact me on social media, and I will pass it along to Caroline, and I know she'll get back to you. She is passionate about talking to parents. In our Know Better segment today, sharing your CGM information, having a conversation about this. What makes you do this in a way that actually benefits everybody and doesn't make it a judgy and uncomfortable situation? Know Better is brought to you by No Foods. No Foods is fantastic. Delicious, clean, nutritious. They were the provider of the desserts at the Touched by Type 1 conference that I went to. I was so happy to see the chocolate chip cookies there at the end of the buffet. And a couple people said, oh, Stacey, yeah, we've heard about this. And they were excited to get to try it. And it's just good stuff. Grain, gluten, wheat, soy, dairy, peanut, yeast, and guilt-free, because it's made with yummy, good-for-you foods like chia flax, coconuts, almonds, and egg whites. I do love those chocolate chip cookies. I fess up. I did take an extra one for the plane ride home. Thank you very much for that. And I love the waffles. Benny likes the chocolate chip waffles. I'm the only one in the house who is really gluten-free, who needs to be. But the kids will nibble on the food anyway, which tells you what you need to know. The chocolate chip muffins are really good. And they're doing great things with pasta now. Check it out. You can go to diabetes-connections.com, click on the No Foods logo, and always save with the promo code Stacey10. At the beginning of the show, I talked about following your kids' CGM. You know, the system that Benny and I have where we talked it out and decided when I would text him, when I wouldn't, that sort of thing. And I gotta be honest with you, one of the things I love about using Dexcom Share is that we talk about diabetes a lot less. I'm not asking all the time, you know, what's your number? Did you check? Blah, 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 that sort of thing. And when I was talking to Kerri Sparling about this, she pointed out that she and Dr. Bill Polonsky, who is the president of the Behavioral Diabetes Institute and a professor in psychiatry at UC San Diego, put out an article a couple of years back about this. The difference is they put it out about adults with diabetes. You know, teenagers are a special breed. Kids are different too. You know, I think it's absolutely an age-appropriate issue. But I would encourage you to use some of these thought starters if you're a parent of a child with type 1. But what happened here is that Kerri and Dr. Polonsky solicited responses from people around the diabetes community, and then they wrote up a great article, which of course I'll link up. But the big theme here is all about respect and privacy. You know, nobody wants to feel nagged or judged. And caregivers were concerned about overreacting to the information, being thought of as nagging. Yeah. And, you know, second guessing the people that they love with diabetes. There's a quote here that I think is absolutely fantastic. Dr. Polonsky says, there's something potentially very wonderful about someone else seeing your numbers if they can handle it. It's one thing to say diabetes is a roller coaster, but it's another thing to see it real time and have some appreciation for this extra job people with diabetes have. Even if you only offer this glimpse for a short period of time, it can be beneficial to your relationship with a loved one. I like that quote because this is a very personal issue, especially if, you know, we had 7 years without a CGM. Seeing it is fantastic, but it changes things. It changes the way you think about everyday actions. You can get very hung up in the minutia of things. And while that's difficult for the person with diabetes to begin with, it's hard for the caregiver too, because, you know, you really want to be careful about not nagging them. You know, imagine a husband and wife. Hey, I saw that you ate that and then your blood sugar went up. You know, get out of my face. I don't need you bothering me about that. That kind of thing. So I urge you to read this article. Again, I'll link it up. And they do a great job of having an actual discussion guide. It's cute. It's called, So You Want to Share Your CGM Data, a discussion guide for that potentially awkward conversation about data access. It's real. It's important. It's very well done. So I urge you to check it out. And now you know better. In our community connection this week, singer Ben Rue. His hit single, I Can't Wait, Be My Wife, was huge on the wedding circuit when it first came out a couple of years ago. Chances are, if you attended a wedding in the last 2 years, you heard it. But he's on tour with new music now, including his single, Let 'Em Loose. Diagnosed at age 14, Ben is now working with Roche, makers of AccuCheck, and he came on the show to talk about life on the road, making music, their big new campaign, and doing it all with type 1.
You got dreams that you've been holding back, ones that you ain't letting past you.
Ben, thanks so much for joining me.
Stacey, thank you so much for having me.
I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me about your experience. How are you? I mean, when you hit with a song like, you know, I Can't Wait and become kind of a wedding anthem, and now you've got your new single, how's everything going for you?
It is tough to come out of the blocks with a wedding ballad, you know. I don't want to be known as the wedding guy, but it is fun. It's cool because I have a lot of people send me like random movie like videos from their wedding saying, hey, you were a part of our wedding, and it really is important to me to, you know, those little moments. That's what making music is about, you know, connecting with people. So having a new single out is super fun. It's always an exciting process to finally get music recorded and out for people who have been waiting on it. So Let 'Em Loose is the new single. It came out on Friday.
So tell me about that, because this is obviously, it's not a wedding song. And this seems to speak a lot to you. Can you tell me a little bit about writing it?
Absolutely. Well, actually, one of my very good friends wrote it, and it was one of those songs that I had heard one time. I write tons of songs and tons of music, and it was one of those that I just heard the first time, and it just spoke to me in a different way, and it moved me. And I'm always a big advocate of the best song wins. And so I feel like it's a message that everyone needs to hear, and it matched so perfectly with the whole campaign that we're doing that we can talk about later, the Buck Off Diabetes campaign. But it's all about living your life without fences.
Yeah. And let's talk about diabetes, because you were diagnosed at a pretty tough time at the age of 14. Not that there's a good time to be diagnosed with type 1. Mm-hmm. But what was going on in your life at that time? You're
telling me. It was a very difficult transitional period. You know, I'm going into high school, trying to make friends, meet girls, play sports, and it was scary. I was embarrassed at times. You know, I'd catch myself testing my blood sugar in the bathroom or in the stall and taking my insulin away from people because I just felt like I was a bit of an outcast at times. But I guess it's one of those things that you have to adjust to quickly because it is with you every day. And so I quickly found I had to surround myself with friends that liked me for who I was, didn't judge me for not being able to drink Mountain Dew at lunch, but people that just liked me for me.
You made me laugh. I don't know if you know, my son was diagnosed right before he turned 2, and he is 13 now. And,
oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah, and Mountain Dew, it's one of those things where I can't believe, I mean, to me, that is the grossest soda ever. But his friends drink it. The sun drop him. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, so, you know, we're all about that. But I hear you on those.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, I hear you on those differences. That's the thing that I think as a parent we don't think about. But as a kid, all you want to do is drink the drink and fit in.
Well, I loved it as a kid, but actually now that I haven't had it regularly for a while, it's a really sweet drink now. You know, things just change over time.
No doubt, no doubt. And you grew up on a farm, right? Did any of that change when you were diagnosed? Did you still keep up the same amount of work that you'd been doing?
I grew up on a farm. My whole family is back there now. It's a grass seed farm out in Oregon, and I've driven tractor and combine since I was 5 years old. And my 2 older brothers are still there on the farm. I was kind of the black sheep that picked up and moved to Nashville, you know. But I think it just, not physically, mentally, it was kind of a tough hurdle. You know, I felt like everything was going to change and then I wasn't going to be able to do the same things that I was, you know, once able to. But I think just after a routine of doing it every day that you realize that, you know, it's not that much different. Everyone has their little quirks about them that make them unique and problems and issues, but it's really how you deal with it that sets you apart.
I'm just curious. I don't want to get too nosy. What about your parents?
Yeah,
and when you're 14, when you're 14 years old, you know, you're trying to get away from your parents as much as you can and get that independence and say, you know, leave me alone, I got this. And then all of a sudden you've got something where you need help, or at the very least, I'm sure your parents wanted to help. Do you remember what that was all like?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I was 14 when I was first diagnosed, and I had no idea what it was. My mom is a nurse, or was a nurse, and brought home little gadgets to test on her kids for fun. And one day she brought home a blood sugar kit randomly from work, and, you know, was like, let's test your blood sugars today. And my brothers were the normal 80 to 110 or 120, whatever it is, whatever they were. And mine was 555. And so I had no idea what it was.
Wait, you're diagnosed because your mom, the nurse, was kind of goofing around, bringing stuff home?
It was all by chance, yes.
Wow.
Thanks.
What else did she test on you guys? No, I'm just kidding.
Nothing else with needles like that, yeah.
But that's remarkable.
That was yeah, I mean, it was tough because I like I said, I didn't really know what it was all about. But when I saw her start crying a little bit, I knew that everything was going to change. And, you know, you mentioned that parents are very involved, and she gave me shots for the first few months, and I kind of got too prideful pretty early and was like, I can do this, you know, which was a good thing. It helped me mature a little earlier, I think, in ways.
I bet. So tell me about this campaign that you've got with Roche and with AccuCheck. I saw you on Good Morning America, and you made the poor anchor guy ride the bull. But
better him than me.
No
better
doubt.
Him than...
Tell me what this is all about.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was fun, wasn't it, watching Rob jump on that bull. It is the Buck Off Diabetes campaign. It's a national awareness program, and you may have seen it earlier or heard, but it embodies this bold new attitude of taking on diabetes. And I'm traveling around the country with Accu-Check and Roche, and we are showing people how they can not only save a buck, but also donate a buck to a good cause.
And this is not just for people with type 1 diabetes. This is for pretty much anybody who uses a meter, right?
It's a growing condition. 1 in 10 people have diabetes, or seems that everyone knows someone who's diabetic. So it's a really easy way to get everyone involved. As far as if you're diabetic, I mentioned you can save a buck by using the Accu-Check Simple Pay card, which allows you to pay the same low price every single time you go buy testing strips, which as a diabetic, I can tell you that any ways to save money are welcome.
Oh, yeah.
I remember in college barely being able to afford buying Eggos and Top Ramen, let alone having to go buy testing strips. And I skimped out a lot, because I couldn't afford them. My girlfriend at the time bought me testing strips for a Christmas present because she knew how much I needed them. So now that's the whole heart behind this whole campaign is management. And, with this new card, you don't have to break the bank as much. And then you can also donate a buck with the campaign by taking your bullhorns with your hands. I'm doing it right now, but you can't see it.
We'll put up the pictures.
You can just visualize it in your head. Making bullhorns out of your hands, taking a picture, and snapping a picture, uploading it to your social media with the hashtag BuckOffDiabetes. And every single post that goes up, Roche Diabetes Care will donate a buck towards a diabetes-related organization. There's Beyond Type 1, Taking Control of Your Diabetes, and College Diabetes Network.
Yeah, those are all great organizations.
Yeah.
I think almost everybody with diabetes has a story like yours where that, your girlfriend bought you test strips for Christmas because it is so expensive. I mean, we laugh, but when you're doing a campaign like this, do you think back to that time? I mean, there's other people out there like that now. It's got to really resonate with you.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me with all this is just be comfortable with who you are, and just be honest with yourself. And I'm just being completely transparent with all this. Like, these are all personal stories. Everyone has their personal stories. I'm just being honest and sharing my point of view. I have, because of music and this whole campaign, I have a good platform to just share, what I've learned. And that's the whole point of this is educate people.
Well, touring is not exactly an easy way to manage diabetes. I mean, on the road, on the bus, eating where you can. How do you make it work?
Well, it is tough. Sometimes we don't play shows. It's just really random being a musician, because being diabetic is all about routine, and being on the road, there's absolutely nothing about routine. Like, I can play a show at 10 a.m. or I've played a show at midnight, until 3 a.m. So it makes it tough to stay on top and manage it sometimes, but I just have to tell myself the same thing. It's just a constant reminder in my head. But my mother used to always say as a kid that pay for it now or pay for it later. So I make sure to stay on top of my management as best I can, and just test myself before shows and sometimes during shows or after shows. And I have to make sure that my band knows, signs of me being low, or like, Ben, you're looking goofy again, man, or is your blood sugar low? It's probably the same thing with you and your son. You notice, little cues about them to, you might need to check your blood sugar.
He loves when I say that.
Yeah, I bet. That's the thing, is whenever my mom or my wife, they're like, "Are you low right now? You're acting funny." No, I'm not low. But
have you ever had to treat on stage? Do you keep something nearby, or is it off stage? How do you work that?
Fortunately, I have not had a low blood sugar on stage, but I always have some sort of snack, orange juice, or I have so many granola bars in my bag, in my guitar bag, from the night before, like 6 months prior. All these snacks in case my blood sugar gets low.
I don't know if I can even ask you this. It's kind of a silly question, but it occurs to me that I have talked to several other country singers, musicians with type 1. There's this club thing going on. Eric Paslay, George Canyon from Canada, Ray Lynn, Crystal Bowersox, Amanda Joe, who's with Truck Stop Honey. And I don't know if you know, Eric Church's mom has type 1.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Isn't that one of those things? So do you all like get together and, trade test strips and advice? I mean.
You know what? Actually, I know Eric Paslay pretty well. And that is one of my favorite things to do when we've done several shows with him and we get together and no lie, we do sit back and we just kind of talk about diabetes and like, how you doing? How's your A1C? How are things going? And like, as small as that conversation is, it really means a lot to be able to speak with other people who are diabetic and hear about their experiences, because it reminds you that you're not in this alone.
That's great. I agree 100%. It's so important to find people that you can talk to. That's great. That's
but that is funny. True. I mean, there is something in the water, as long as it's not sugar water. I mean, we should be okay.
Hey, before I let you go, we are coming up when this episode airs, I should say, it'll be next week. Before I let you go, we are coming up on Mother's Day, and we've talked about your mom a little bit. Any message for her?
Mama Rue. She was literally there from the start with everything, and always been a very good proponent of living your dreams. And my dad, my whole family really, but you got that special bond with your mom and dad, and so I thank her very much for always trying to get us kids into music. We were always playing sports, my brothers and I, and my dad got us into sports, which is awesome. But she was always pushing music on us, and not until I got into my 20s did I really think about pursuing this whole music thing. So thank her for being on top of things and I guess caring to test her child's blood sugar after work. I actually have a show in Vegas with my AccuCheck people, the campaign, and iHeart coming up, and they're going to be there for the Mother's Day, so that'll be fun.
Oh, that's great. She must have seen you perform many times, but to be in a venue like that and with iHeart, such big backers, it's got to be a great moment for her. That's great. Yeah,
it should be fun as long as it's not super hot, Vegas weather can get to me. I live in Nashville, but I'm still an Oregon boy.
I was just going to say, a lot of people think that maybe they heard farming, or they may think of different climate, but no, it was Oregon.
It rains quite a bit there.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for joining me. Of course, we'll link up more information about the campaign and where everybody can learn more and post their pictures on social media. I really appreciate you taking some time to join me. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And if you want to hear more about my music, go to benruemusic.com, and the campaign, go to BuckOffDiabetes.com. But thank you, Stacey, so much for having me.
More information, as we said, at diabetes-connections.com. You can hear Ben's music. You can see more about the AccuCheck campaign. Look at the pictures of the way you can donate $1. And that's just by, turn your fingers into bullhorns, as they say, and post a photo. So we'll show you what that looks like. And, of course, more information on how to save money, as they say, save $1 with AccuCheck. I got to say, and I know this gets me into trouble, but I think maybe it's all of my years in working with a commercial radio station where we had to be so careful about the FCC. All the wordplay, like with Buck Off Diabetes and Duck Diabetes, there's another campaign for that. Even saying diabadass, sometimes I'm waiting for the alarms to go off and the FCC to swoop in. And it's just one of those things where I'm like, oh my gosh, can I say this on the radio? But that's just me. And I definitely don't worry about that in my real life, as my friends will tell you. But again, more information on this, just go to diabetes-connections.com and you can learn more. All right, where am I going? Let me look at my calendar. I got to keep my head on straight. This time of year, believe it or not, my kids are starting to wrap up school. Down here, we get out of school right before Memorial Day. Holy cow. So there's a lot going on at this moment. But I am just back from the Lilly Blogger Conference. I will tell you about that more next week. I'm sure I talked about it on social media as well. This was to look at their new devices. They are entering the pump and pen market, but I can assure you the price of insulin came up as well. So we'll be talking about that. We also have the JDRF 1 challenge with writing on insulin. That is later this month. The last day of school is coming up right before Memorial Day, as I said, which makes me a very busy mom. Benny goes to diabetes camp in June. He is already looking forward to that, talking to friends and seeing what bunk he's going to be in and all that good stuff. July is Children with Diabetes Friends for Life. We're going to be taping a show there. I am so excited about that. Really something new and different. Later in July, I may sneak away to Podcast Movement. That's not a diabetes event, but it is a podcast convention. And if I can swing it, I'm going to check that out. I'll let you know if I find anything interesting out that I can pass along to you, some behind the scenes stuff that could be fun. And then a little break right now. The next event on the calendar for me is October, where I'll be going to Friends for Life in Falls Church. So if you have an event where you'd like me to come speak, please let me know. I got lots of topics, or I can come and MC like I did a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C. That is always fun. Just email me, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or give me a shout out on social media and we'll work it out. Hey, if you like the show, please tell somebody who's touched by diabetes. That is the best way to get the word out. And make sure to subscribe on whatever podcast app you are listening. Of course, you can always listen on social media too. Just make sure to check out the show notes if you need any more information on the website. Thanks as always to my editor, to John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. There is so much going on in our community right now. I know you're all really busy, and I'm thrilled that you spend an hour each week with me. It's so great to just spend some time with people who get it. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.